Hello and welcome to another Everything Digital Health. Today I'm going to come back to vibe engineering. So I know I've done a couple of episodes already on vibe engineering. Part 1 and part 2 were very basic, and they were really trying to just emphasize the changing way that software development is happening, and to emphasize the need for using specification and roadmaps and things like that, sort of essentially memory tools for the LLMs to help them know where they're up to, and also so that you can see what you've got to do. And it also provides an interface point. It means that that's where you put in new ideas about functionality into a specification, as opposed to writing it straight into the code kind of thing. We did an example of, I think, a very quick blog site that was just kind of like 10 minutes of like, you can make this without writing any code. Then we moved on to my recipes site, which was kind of frivolous example, but it's something that is a more ongoing project, and I do use that exact workflow that I described to add new recipes. But I did promise I would do a clinical app, so here we go. What really sort of crystallized in my mind that this is definitely now good enough to be using is, we had a project at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, where I most often work, which was essentially an app that had been built in iOS and Swift. It needed to be updated, but also it needed an Android version. And the funding to build the Android version had essentially kind of run out. So there was a bit of a problem in that we definitely wanted to go ahead and help them, but to refactor an entire application and sort of keep feature parity between iOS and Android, there's a huge amount of work there. And you're talking about multiple developers for multiple months to even just get you to a kind of pre-alpha version. And I thought, well, if Simon Willison can do it, then I can do it. And at the time, I think this happened just before Christmas, Simon Willison's blog, which I'll link to, had talked about using this approach of creating a spec and a roadmap and that sort of thing to replatform, I think it was a thing called just HTML into JavaScript. So I think he didn't need that to be done. It was more to test the capability of the tools. But he set the tools up so that it would extract a specification and use the test that already existed and create a replatformed version of the same code that did the same thing. And I saw this and thought, this is exactly the problem we have. We've got a code base that's in iOS, and we want that code base in Flutter, which is a cross-platform framework that allows you to build with one code base, and you can then compile it for iOS, Android, Windows, macOS, Linux, and the web. Once you've got a Flutter code base, you don't need to worry about feature parity between two different code bases, because there is only one code base, and you can just put all the development effort into that. So I thought, right, well, we've got that code base, which is essentially already a specification. So let's see what we can do. First things first, I get all the files together. We had a backend which was based on Firebase. We had an empty, at the time, folder for the Flutter codebase. I had the iOS app and I had the web app. Clearly there's going to be an awful lot of documented functionality in there, and actually the code itself is documentation of the functionality. But I don't know Swift for iOS development, and it would take me quite a while to get good enough to be able to extract all that functionality and rewrite it in a transliteration into another language. But luckily, I didn't have to. So let's imagine I don't have those spec things. What I did start with was this. A simple prompt. I need to port this iOS app into the Flutter framework. Start by reading the Medicines for Children iOS, Medicines for Children web app, and Medicines for Children backend repos, and create a spec.md in Medicines for Children Flutter, which lists all the functional specification of the Flutter version. And that's what it did. And so it just churns away, and this took a couple of hours, I think. I just had to sort of keep kicking it. I gave it some guidance. Look, that roadmap was a bit too high level, so I was like, and you want to get a little bit more detail. But the long story short is that then you end up with going to here. I like to collect all the spec in spec folder, and you ask it to come up with a list of the things this app should do. Things like where is the logo and where is the navigation, because it's going to have to build those things. But then in more detail, you go into what does it do, how does it work, splash screen, home screen, medicines, child screen. And this has been arrived at over days and days of iteration now. But essentially, the first draft of this was completely written by the LLM. What that does is condenses everything out of the Swift code into something that I can read, which is spec.md. And then I said, go and write a roadmap. And it wrote this really impressive roadmap that I was quite pleased with. We've got this implementation roadmap, technical, listing everything you do to start the Flutter project, how you do local profiles, and then how you do app shell. And all of this was prompted, so I asked it to do things. But gradually, I try and rely less on the prompt. So prompting is kind of ephemeral. You saying things to the LLM, but then it kind of forgets after a while what you've said, because the context window is only a certain number of tokens big. Even a big context window, it might be 100,000 or several 100,000 tokens, but eventually you will run out, and it will start to sort of forget where it's up to. Some of the more modern coding tools now do a step called compression, where they will essentially create a synopsis of everything that's happened in the context window and condense that down into a little sort of update document. And then it will kind of flush its context window, read the update document and go, okay, right, that's all the key points from the context. But that's actually only just happened in the last few months. And when I was doing this, that didn't exist. So it was more important to try and keep as much of the salient information in files. So that's my key point, is get the LLM to write files that have information about the project. There's multiple reasons for that. Apart from the context window, it means that that's your interface to change the specification. So early on in this project, I noticed that they had this Firebase thing. The backend was written in something called Firebase, which is an authentication and data management layer that's a Google service. And to me, I just thought, we've already had enough problems keeping this application running in terms of costs. What I don't want to do is tie it to a proprietary backend where there's ongoing costs. Ideally, I want all the data to stay on the device. So I changed the spec and removed all the stuff about Firebase. In fact, I asked the LLM to do it. I said, go through the existing spec, remove any mention of Firebase, and instead I want to use a local files storage system so that any of the data just stays on the device. We'll have ways of exporting that and making it interoperable, but clearly that removes that paid dependency on Firebase. So I was able to change the spec because I had a written spec. I asked it to write a roadmap, and in particular I like it when the roadmap items have a little markdown checkbox, because they all start off empty, and then you can instruct the LLM as it progresses to cross off the things it's done, which is good for you because you can see where it's up to. It's good for the LLM because it can see where it's up to. So when its context window has been exhausted, this forms like a document. You can say, go and read the roadmap again, see where you're up to, and do the next thing. And it will just keep working through. So over the course of about 4 or 5 days, I just kept telling it to continue. So it will do a little bit of work and it will come back and it will say, I've been a good boy, I've done something. And you'll say, well done, that's very good. You might have some changes to that feature, but if not, then I would say continue. And it would just go ahead and take the next thing from the roadmap and do that. And while that was happening, I would go and test the app. Okay, so you can see this is the Linux version. The code base can be built for any platform we want. This is a kind of desktop app version. And in the process of developing this port, I did think, well, there are definitely circumstances in which the purpose of this app actually would be easier to use if it was on a desktop. But equally, you need it in your mobile device as well. So we decided to make it so that you could use it in all of those. If you create a profile, as you can see, you can import a backup, you can create another profile. There's a passcode which you need to enter to unlock a profile. The profiles are encrypted on disk. This is all specification that I just wrote in, didn't write any of that code. And essentially the purpose of the app is to give you a schedule with different days of the week, and you'd have different medicines that a child that you're looking after might have to take, and each of these medicines has, you can have a photograph of the medicine, you can have, whether it's every day, you have a dose and that sort of thing. It's quite a simple app, and bearing in mind this is pretty much exactly the functionality that was in the other version of the app. I have tried not to add anything new at this stage, but I just wanted to get us from the point where we had nothing to the point where we have at least a basis that's the same as what the other app is. Clearly there's a ton of work that needs to be done on this to make it better, and the user interface isn't particularly great, especially on a big screen. But we have got things like, we've got some settings you can go and set, so change passcode. You've got light theme, you can have a dark theme. We've got different text sizes. You can have the reminders. There's a privacy policy. We've got a user guide, which is built into the app to show you how to do everything. You can see the about information, and you can import and export the backups. And then Share Center is intended to be a way of sharing the schedule with other people who might have caring responsibilities for that child. I've focused for now on things like printing. So, for example, you can just print a summary PDF. Let's see. Yeah, if you click on export, it will export it as a PDF. So you could send that to somebody who's just going to have to maybe fill in a couple of doses, and then you could put that back in to the app later. Of course, the roadmap is that we should have digital schedules with digital sharing, so that you'd be able to hand off from one device to another device. They might issue a couple of doses of medications, and then you can merge that back in with all the data you have, so you can see exactly when the medications were given. Medicines are obviously like a huge area. From a clinical informatics point of view, there's a lot to do to make this really good. The existing app, for example, when you are looking at a particular medication, it doesn't check that you've typed in an actually existing medication. It doesn't check that the dose is right, and as you can see, we've got 250 milligrams. So there's a lot of stuff that you'd want to improve to make it, to put some guardrails around this, so that, for example, you could only input a medication that exists. However, that's bigger than you think, because what about things like non-prescribable medications, or folk remedies or something like that? You don't want the app to completely preclude its own usefulness by locking out loads of stuff that you might want to do. But that's sort of me getting into the exciting scope of this project. The key takeaway is you have a specification written in Markdown. You have a roadmap written in Markdown. You can update and add things to that specification while the LLM is coding the next feature. So you set it off and it spins up and starts doing stuff. In the meantime, you're reading the spec going, is that what we want? What do we want it to do? How do we want this to work? And you gradually iterate and you iterate. But it means that as a team of one, you can get an awful lot done. So in short, this took me about 4 days to get from nothing at all to an acceptable version 1 that you could take back to the people who had originally made that app. And we could say, look, we did this. It didn't really cost as much because We were just kind of doing it in spare time. But we now have something to build on. What shall we do next? So we went from being stuck without any funding and without any way of getting any further forward to having a prototype app. And that's very exciting to the people who are sort of commissioning these things. You can say, we've actually got something. So you're not now stuck anymore. We just need to know what you want us to do next. So yeah, that's it. It's increasingly difficult to do like hands-on practical stuff because I'm really just telling you how to do it. And I suppose if people want me to, I could do a much more sort of tutorial style thing of like how to get set up. But honestly, the setup is not as hard as you think. It's installing things like Codex CLI, having GitHub Copilot in VS Code and things, which are often just point and click operations. But maybe that should be my next episode of Vibe Engineering, is a bit more, not so much what you can do, but how literally to do it. But I hope somebody's found this interesting or useful. It really just shows how you can now start to get to a sort of clinical app and how much can be done in how short a time with a very small team. Very exciting stuff. I'm very pleased that it's happening now because I think it means that we can do so much more than we used to be able to do in terms of coding. We still need the technical capability. You still need to know what you're building to some extent. So you need to know, for example, that you want to build it in Flutter, because you may not be able to get that information just from the LLM. However, it also can help with that sort of thing. So if you don't know what to do, you can sort of ask and just say, I have this existing iOS app. I'd like to re-platform it in something. What options are out there? And it will do an appraisal of what it knows about, subject to the rules of LLMs, which is that they can hallucinate and they can make things up. But I've noticed that's a lot less now. There does seem to be a lot more reliable information coming out of it. So you can ask it for an options appraisal, and then you can pick one of those things and it will just start building it. I'd be really interested to know if anybody has gone ahead and built anything, and you know how you found it. But for now, I shall leave it there. This is just my sort of way of following up on the Vibe Engineering work that I've been doing. I will be posting more videos. I'm working on stuff all the time now using this kind of methodology. So please do ask questions if you want me to do anything specific on the show. Otherwise, I will just keep rambling on at you. Thanks very much for your time and for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.